Good evening, and thank you for joining me tonight. We bring you a TJPS special report on this Saturday, a story that has caught the world's attention. It was on Christmas Day here in the United States, and there was major breaking international news. The president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, got on TV and announced his resignation as the eighth and final leader of the Soviet Union. As I say, this was a major story because the Soviet Union was not just this small, obscure country that's a nice vacation spot. No, it had major foreign policy implications. And just to give you a little bit of context here, on January 1st, 1991, the Soviet Union was the largest country in the world, covering more than 8 million square miles. That's nearly 1/6 of Earth's land surface. So its leader resigning as president was just obviously going to be a huge global deal. This was reporting from NBC News.
Good evening. Mikhail Gorbachev and the Soviet Union are history. So today, the United States began to shift gears toward Boris Yeltsin and the new Commonwealth of Independent States. President Bush said he's been in close touch with Yeltsin and expects a meeting soon. NBC's Jim Miklaszewski is at the White House. Jim?
Jane, just a few months ago, the White House would barely give Yeltsin the time of day. Now Bush is talking about a possible summit with Yeltsin, and they've got plenty to discuss. Just before he met with reporters today, Bush signed the CFE treaty. First negotiated with the Soviets, it reduces conventional forces in Europe. But the enormous problems that lie ahead in dealing with this new Commonwealth left little time to celebrate. First, it's more complex. With no central government, the U.S. must now deal with 12 separate republics. And with their economies on the verge of collapse, Bush himself warned of a potential for chaos.
I'm not predicting disaster. I am just saying we've got to be alert to the pressures that are going to be brought to bear on the republics.
Hunger is the most immediate threat. U.S. officials predict that some of the republics could run out of food by March. Time is critical. It takes 3 months from the time a shipment of grain leaves port before it turns up as a loaf of bread on a store shelf. Bush officials say U.S. shipments of humanitarian aid will continue, but there's no promise of any new direct financial aid. But U.S. fears over nuclear weapons have been eased considerably. U.S. officials say the republics have given credible assurances over nuclear weapons security. And within 10 days, a State Department team heads to the republics to advise on the dismantling of the weapons. Bush thinks nuclear controls will actually be easier with the new Commonwealth.
Because we don't have the concept on their part of viewing the United States as an enemy, as happened over all the years of the Cold War.
In a Christmas night address, Bush gave credit for all this to his old friend, Mikhail Gorbachev.
His policies permitted the peoples of Russia and the other republics to cast aside decades of oppression and establish the foundations of freedom.
That was reporting from NBC News on December 26, 1991. The Soviet Union was no more. It was not just one nation. It was actually 15 different states under 8 different rulers over the course of its 69 years, nearly 7 decades spanning. And when the Union collapsed, those 15 different individual states had to become independent and split up into nations like Georgia, Ukraine, Russia, Lithuania, Estonia, Armenia, Belarus, Azerbaijan, and 7 other nations. Along the way, Russia, even though it's not the Soviet Union anymore, it's still the largest country in the world, and it sought to intimidate the former surrounding Soviet states into staying within their realm. For example, when the 15 states separated into countries, a civil war broke out in the nation of Georgia, when 2 provinces, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, both in ethnicities, wanted their own independence within Georgia. And in the late 1990s, NATO, which is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization created back in 1949 under the US, essentially it's a group of several Western countries, including Canada and European nations, to essentially provide collective protection against the Soviet Union. Their main purpose is to guarantee the freedom and security of their members through political and military means. It is a huge family. They defend each other. For instance, after the US was attacked on September 11th, 2001, NATO immediately came to our aid. So in the 90s, NATO, this powerful global institution, and the European Union, they expanded their influence into Eastern and Central Europe, which was very close to the former Soviet Union. And one of their former states, Georgia, and nevertheless, the nation of Georgia, they kept moving further towards the West in terms of ideals and beliefs and systems. In 2003, they supported a US-led coalition fighting in Iraq. After the election of Mikhail Saakashvili, excuse me if I pronounced that name wrong, in 2004, the country continued this trend. After Georgia arrested 4 Russian military officers for suspected spying, Russia basically responded to that by closing Georgia businesses and deporting Georgian citizens. So tensions were quite high during this time. Dr. Mark Galetti, a London-based lecturer on Russian security affairs, told History.com, quote, "Georgia was clearly embarked on a process of trying to break out of Russia's sphere of influence. And as far as Russia was concerned, this was an absolute priority. It had to maintain its sphere of influence. And if it let Georgia go, then who could be next?" End quote. And so just think about that for a second. If Russia let Georgia go from its sphere of influence, who could be next? That would create a domino effect of more of the former Soviet states becoming aligned with the West and joining NATO, and Russia slowly, gradually becoming isolated. And so in 2008, during the Beijing Olympics in China, and with the Georgia on the verge of joining NATO, that's when it happens. Russia invaded the nation of Georgia. 40,000 soldiers marched in, accompanied by 1,200 armored vehicles. It made international news at the time. This was reporting from NBC. This was reporting, from CBS
Overseas,
News.
a fierce battle broke out today on the fringe of the former Soviet Union. Tonight, Secretary of State Rice is calling on Russia to end its assault on the Republic of Georgia, now a U.S. ally. The fighting is in Georgia's province of South Ossetia, home to many Russians who are still loyal to the Kremlin and want to break away from Georgia. Richard Roth has the latest.
Columns of Russian tanks and troops rolled into the American-backed former Soviet Republic of Georgia today after a nighttime barrage of artillery fire and rockets. Georgia said it was trying to retake control of South Ossetia, the breakaway province on Russia's border that's policed by Russian peacekeepers. Claiming more than 10 of its soldiers were killed in the night attack, Moscow said it would retaliate. Russian jets bombed 4 airfields, according to Georgia, and there are conflicting reports tonight over who's controlling Ossetia's main city. Separatists there claim as many as 1,000 people have been killed in the fighting. Journalist Georgi Lomsadze.
We're very scared, and some people are trapped right now. Many civilians are trapped in their houses and their cellars as very heavy fighting still goes on.
Roads to the Russian border are filling with refugees, and Georgia's capital tonight is filled with tension.
Nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows if Russia eventually moves to use all its military might against Georgia, because in that case, Georgia doesn't stand a chance.
President Bush and Russian Prime Minister Putin talked about it at the Olympics, where, according to a Russian spokesman, Putin bluntly told the president war has started today. Moscow puts blame on the U.S. and its allies, saying what made Georgia's offensive possible was military aid from the West. The U.S. responded with a call that sounded like an echo of the Cold War, demanding a ceasefire and a pullback of Russian troops from foreign soil. Richard Roth, CBS News, London.
Once again, that was reporting from CBS News. This was just absolutely horrifying. A ceasefire was soon reached, but over 1,000 people died. Many people were injured, went missing, and Russian troops slowly started to finally withdraw, but they kept some there at checkpoints in Georgia. The president at the time of the United States was George W. Bush, and he announced that humanitarian aid would be sent to Georgia, and other diplomats actually went there to go check out the situation on the ground. As of 2020, they were still Russian troops in Georgia. A Georgian diplomat said that only makes them more committed to joining NATO and the European Union. Last year, this was reporting from Euractiv.com, quote, 13 years on, 20% of Georgia remains occupied. Russia has not implemented crucial elements of the 2008 point ceasefire agreement, including withdrawing its forces to pre-conflict positions. Instead, Moscow has increased its political, economic, and social influence in the occupied territories of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The populations of both have become more isolated and susceptible to Russian disinformation and propaganda. The COVID pandemic reinforced this trend. Russia has also strengthened its military presence. Both territories have become large military bases that Moscow uses to project power across the region. Today, between 9,000 and 10,000 Russian soldiers are deployed. Furthermore, creeping annexation continues along with the administrative boundary line. Georgian territory is being eked away centimeter by centimeter. This situation has also resulted in the ongoing arbitrary detention of Georgian citizens. Human rights have also been in freefall, with numerous human rights violations happening on a daily basis. International access to the occupied territories continues to be denied to international human rights monitors and humanitarian assistance. The European Union monitoring mission is unable to properly carry out its mandate as it is prevented from entering Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Beyond toothless statements, the international committee, not least the EU and the US, have failed to challenge Russia for its non-compliance and ongoing occupation. This gives the impression that they can live with the status quo. End quote. After Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, there were no consequences for them, no sanctions, no removal from international groups. They were just given a second chance. That was a huge mistake, because not punishing behavior like that and allowing a reset in ties, not punishing a dramatic international, I guess, theatrics like that from a huge foreign power, something that hasn't happened like that since World War II, when Hitler started taking countries for himself and seizing them and making them part of Germany. Not punishing something like that and just allowing, oh yeah, we'll give you a second chance, and just allowing a reset in ties, that does not make a country like Russia ponder on what they've done, saying, maybe we shouldn't do that again, and feel bad about it. It emboldens them. And they do it again. Whether it's the same country or another, they will do it again, and so they did. In the year of 2014, Russia was hosting the Winter Olympics in Sochi, and the eyes of the world were upon them as they were having this huge moment. But before the games were over that year, Russia and Putin in particular got very embarrassed as this pro-democracy uprising took place in the capital of Ukraine. It actually led to Ukrainian's president actually fleeing the country, who was essentially this pro-Russian guy at the time. Russia, of course, had installed this pro-Putin guy to be the president of the country to make sure that they were still aligning with Russia's views and not getting any ideas about becoming a part of NATO or aligning with Western culture. And so in 2014, following these mass protests in Ukraine, with citizens demanding their country be a Western-facing nation integrated with Europe, that is no longer to be managed as a corrupt territory of Russia and the Kremlin. That pro-Putin leader had been installed by by Russia. Initially, he responded by killing lots of those protesters on the streets. And that just looked horrible alongside all the Olympic coverage that Russia was hosting. And so ultimately, he ended up fleeing the country. He fled to Russia after the situation intensified, and the people in Ukraine won. But Russia was not having it. They were not allowing them to have a prolonged victory. And so they were infuriated by this news so much that they decided to annex Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, and they sent in Russian military forces. After that major event, the Obama administration imposed sanctions on 11 Russians. Steve Holland from Reuters reported at the time, quote, "The sanctions were the most visible sign of U.S. anger at Russia's attempt to absorb the Crimea region in southern Ukraine, reflecting the deepest plunge in U.S.-Russian relations since the Cold War." End quote. And this news was so concerning that it ultimately got Russia kicked out of the G8, thenceforth making it the G7. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, it's basically a group of the world's 7 largest economies. We got Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US. And according to BBC News, the group regards itself as a community of values with freedom and human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and prosperity and sustainable development as its key principles. Subsequent to those events of Russia being removed from the G8, making it the G7, the United States pledged $1 billion in aid to Ukraine and condemned Russia, and that was just remarkable. I mean, it showed another sign of we're with you and we've got your back, Ukraine. We are your ally. We are your friend. But following those events, President Obama announced the European Reassurance Initiative, which later changed its name to the European Deterrence Initiative. But essentially, this was quite a huge step because after the European Reassurance Initiative was created back in 2014, the Obama administration posted this statement on their website, quote, "To reassure allies of our solemn commitment to their security and territorial integrity as members of the NATO alliance." The statement continues, this is, quote, "necessary and appropriate show of support to allies who are now deeply concerned by Russia's occupation and attempted annexation of Crimea and other provocative actions in Ukraine. The United States stands by its allies as they have stood by us," end quote. So these 4 major actions were taken in retaliation against Russia for their reprehensible actions. 1, sanctions. Russia gets sanctions by the Obama administration. 2, they get kicked out of the G8, making it the G7. 3, the United States pledges $1 billion in aid to Ukraine while simultaneously condemning Russia. And 4, President Barack Obama creates the European Reassurance Initiative, which later becomes the European Deterrence Initiative, basically as a show of force and commitment and solidarity with Ukraine and also our European allies. Hey, we've got your back. We see what Russia is doing, and we will defend you. We will help you. We will protect you. And in 2017, when Donald Trump became president of the United States, he showed a profound love for Russia. In the second year of his administration, he decided to hold off on rendering Russia new sanctions despite it being the law. And then in 2019, Trump advocated for bringing Russia back into the G7. Hey, let's make it the G8 again. I mean, the president literally postponed the whole event because he wanted Russia to be there because Russia was absent. Essentially saying that Russia belongs there and let's make it the group of 8 again. And so those are 2 things. Here's the third one. In 2019, Donald Trump held up Ukraine military aid meant to confront Russia. Why did he do that? Reportedly to fund his border wall that he said Mexico was going to pay for, of course. Ultimately, that is not the reason why he was impeached. It was related to withholding Ukraine military aid, but it was for political gain. And when Trump did that in 2019, you want to know another place he cut funding from to help build his wall? It was the European Deterrence Initiative. So this consistent affection for Russia has emboldened them. I mean, the whole reason why Donald Trump got impeached for the first time in 2019 was because he essentially said, hey, Ukraine, I want you to investigate Joe Biden. I want you to investigate my Democratic opponent, who probably is my most likely Democratic opponent in the national presidential election. I need you to investigate Joe Biden for corruption. Ukraine said no, so the Trump administration deliberately withheld protection from them. We give Ukraine Javelin missiles to protect themselves against the Russians. We are an ally to Ukraine. Ukraine is our ally. We protect them because we understand Russian aggression and Russian provocation as Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, and that is a lingering threat with the current and continuous, almost perpetual occupation of Crimea. Crimea is a part of Ukraine. Russia annexed it in 2014 illegally. That is not their territory, but Russian troops still stay there. And so for this to have happened, for Russia to continuously be emboldened internationally, I mean, over the years, this obviously does lead to some concerns of what may happen next, what they may try to do, how they may try to calculate their next move. And now we are here in 2022 with that history in mind under a new administration, President Joe Biden. that is watching closely, along with NATO and the European Union. There are reemerging tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is a former Soviet state, and now it's an independent nation. And they, like Georgia in 2008, have been wanting to be a part of NATO for a very, very long time, wanting to align with cultures. In 2014, when that little Putin, when little person that Putin installed in Russia to be their leader in Ukraine, yeah, he fled the country, but that was only because there were pro-democracy uprisings in Ukraine at the time. This national revelatory strength saying that we want to be a part of NATO, we want to be a Western-facing country. We no longer want to align with this dictatorship that is Putin's Russia. That's why he fled the country. The Ukrainians are still committed to becoming a part of NATO, but Russia does not want that. And what do they do when they don't want someone to become a part of NATO, specifically a former Soviet state? They invade the country. They invaded Ukraine in 2014 for that reason. They invaded Georgia in 2008 for that same reason. Russia strongly objects to the fact that they are aggressive in this, or that they should, or that an invasion is about to happen. The question that everyone is asking now is, will there be war? Will Russia invade Ukraine again? That is a live question that the world is wanting answers to right now. And we've got that story coming up next. Stay with us.